This is not a cyclone. This is two low pressure systems that are causing a developing situation. It's not pleasant here today, but I'm just in the calm. There's a storm on its way. There's nothing worse than having your dream holiday turn into a bit of a cloudy, windy mess. Cyclone Ditwah slammed into Sri Lanka in November 2025. It triggered devastating floods and landslides and displaced over 233,000 people. Tourism is returning very quickly, but also unevenly, and not always in a way that actually helps the hardest hit regions. But that doesn't have to be the end of the story. Turns out it's not all doom and gloom. It just takes patience. If done well, communities don't just survive these punches, they come back stronger and more resilient. Hi, I'm Justine, the nerdy half. Today we're going to look at what signs to look for that an environment is ready for tourism and how tourism can help these communities bounce back stronger. One of New Zealand's neighbours, the beautiful island nation of Fiji, has an excellent example for us to follow. Last time I went to Fiji was 2003. I was only there for a short time and instantly loved it. So I put it on my gotta go back there sometime list. But every time I went to book a return, something seemed to derail it. First the relentless floods and Cyclone Jean in 2010, and then the devastating 2016 Cyclone Winston, and then of course, COVID. But the country's tourism has rebounded and grown. In 2024, they hosted over 1 million international tourists. That's the first time in their history they've hit those numbers. But more importantly, the reef coverage in monitored sites has jumped almost 30%, and community programs have created 500 new marine tourism jobs. So what can we learn from them? There were options for Fiji after Winston. If they'd thought about tourism as just a short-term revenue engine, they could have just gone back to business as usual with resorts in the same high-risk locations, tourist activities putting the same pressure on the reefs. That would have been the faster track, more familiar and probably cheaper. But they chose the harder path. They asked themselves the question, how can we make sure that tourism is less extractive so that the next cyclone is less damaging? First thing they did was think of their reefs as infrastructure, not scenery. Reef protection stopped being a nice environmental add-on and became disaster prevention. Fiji expanded the locally managed marine areas, developing community-run no-take zones that reduce the reef damage and improve the fish stocks. And at the same time, NGOs and dive operators, especially along the coral coast, expanded reef nursery programs, replanting storm-damaged coral. If you've gone diving in Fiji in the last few years, you might have seen coral tables or rope nurseries. And if you're really savvy in planning your travel, you've probably had a chance to actually have a hands-on role in this recovery process. Because in Fiji, they made reef protection literally part of the tourism experience. So both locals and tourists can go down and actually garden the coral themselves. They might feel like small effort, but it all helps accelerate the reef recovery and the management. Because secondly, resorts had to prove sustainability, not just claim it. They had to prove they were acting on environmental sustainability in real ways. And that's the key phrase here. So in Fiji, you should actually see operators doing measurable recovery work, not just sticking in a leaf icon on a brochure. True, the standards are still voluntary rather than legally enforced, but Fiji is actively working on strengthening that sector, particularly as they know that there are more climate risks coming. And number 3, they trained locals for marine jobs instead of pushing them out. Rather than just importing foreign conservation experts, their programs emphasize training Fijians as marine biologists. So when you come to one of the community-run marine protection areas, you're most likely to be hosted by a local guide. Youth are gaining skills that allow them to participate directly in sustainable tourism, while they get to reap the economic benefits as well. Another approach I really like in Fiji is that it's pay to play. So within the fees you're paying at your resort for any of your tourism services, some of this money is going directly back to the government, and this has been spent on environmental initiatives. So for us travel lovers, particularly anyone looking around Sri Lanka and that area at the moment, we can use Fiji as an example to check first. Don't just check the weather reports, checking to see whether our tourist dollars are going to be helpful or harmful. So I've made a bit of a decision list to help us out.
Number 1, follow the recovery, not the marketing. Are there community or government-led sustainability programs, or just promises from the resorts? If recovery only talks about visitor numbers, that's a red flag. Post-Ditwah tourism gives these messages that emphasise the south and the west coasts as open and resilient. But meanwhile, the northern, eastern and central highlands are still flood-ravaged.
And that is an option that some countries take. They'll focus on rebuilding the visitor infrastructure, thinking that that revenue will help locals long term. But actually what happens is a large amount of the money ends up going offshore anyway, and the real cost of recovery is left to those who are just struggling to keep their feet on the ground.
When you focus recovery on the unaffected tourist areas, it's not necessarily a bad thing. In the short term, it can keep money flowing and it can prevent a full economic collapse. But the risk is when that's the only story we tell. Recovery can start to hide the vulnerability instead of actually fix it. Number 2, treat nature like infrastructure. Healthy reefs, mangroves and forests, they're not just pretty, they actually reduce storm damage, flooding and erosion. So tourism activities should fund or participate in protecting them. Ditwah's flooding exposed Sri Lanka's eroded natural defences. They've had decades of mangrove clearance for shrimp ponds. They've drained their wetlands for urban sprawl. And the deforested hillsides for tea plantations. All this just amplified destruction beyond what rainfall alone would normally cause. So travellers need to stay clear of hotels that have been built directly on floodplains or reclaimed wetlands.
Now, personal opinion here, but I would double check all your green certificates and really look what's behind them. A lot of sites will just stick on a little green leaf and be done with it. They might not wash your towels so often, but this doesn't mean they're really environmentally helpful.
After Cyclone Ditwah, a lot of Sri Lankan tourism businesses started using words like eco, sustainable and green. And that's not because they're being dishonest, it's because those terms aren't regulated. You want to look for third-party certifications, not self-awarded labels.
Fiji's approach is different because it's government verified, not a corporate label.
You also want to make sure that locals aren't sidelined, that your tourism activities are supporting long-term skills, not just short-term jobs, and that the communities are retaining the control over the land. And if the experience depends on local knowledge, then chances are the benefits will stay local too. After Cyclone Ditwah, the large resorts recovered faster than the smaller community-run tourism. But what it means is when you book those big hotels, your money mostly goes to the operators who are already wealthy or perhaps even overseas based. So you want to make sure that the operators are hiring and training local staff. Just small choices like this can really directly support recovery where it's needed most. And number 5, you have to accept that timing matters. Over-tourism can undo recovery. So sometimes the most responsible choice is just to wait. Right after a disaster, communities need space to make sure that their tourism is aligned with rebuilding, not just a rush to revenue. And this doesn't just apply to recovery from natural disaster, but from the man-made ones too. Last week's video talked about how to know when a community is ready to host tourists after conflict, and that showed how capacity building has to come first. Fiji shows that bounce forward can work when tourism rebuilds sustainably and empowers the locals, not just chases the numbers. So please share this checklist with others to make sure that all our travel dollars are fueling resilience, because that's one thing our future generations are definitely going to need.
And of course, don't forget to hit that subscribe and notifications bell to make sure you can find out what's happening in the world next week and what it means for us travel lovers. And hopefully I'll have some sunshine. Until then, happy travels everyone.